Hi everyone, I'm meteorologist Royal Norman. This is Sonoran Sky Live, a service of First Alert Weather and Arizona's family. And today's topic is going to be El Nino. And are we in for, well, depending on who you read, a super El Nino, a super duper El Nino, a supercalifragilisticexpialidocious Nino, or maybe something else. But first, before we get to that, we have two experts from Climate Central that I want to introduce to you in a bit. We're going to talk about our heat today. It's the fourth straight day where we've had first alerts for heat. Unseasonably hot again today around the valley. We do have a heat warning out until 8 o'clock tonight. It impacts about 4.75 million people. That's the area where this warning covers right now. So this will be the last day of the unseasonably hot weather, and then we should see temperatures start to break, which is the good news. Our forecast high for today, though, is 107. We had 109 yesterday for the hottest day of the streak. 107 today, and then tomorrow we should be right around 102, 103, so a real decent break in those temperatures by then. In the meantime, we have one watch to tell you about. It's Fire Weather Watch up in northeast Arizona, mainly reservation country, but also includes Flagstaff and the Grand Canyon. Is for tomorrow. It's going to be a windy day in northern Arizona. We know how dry it is. That's the reason we get the fire weather watches out, and that will include 11 a.m. until 8 p.m. Tomorrow. And of course, we'll keep you updated on any of our heat issues and our fire issues throughout the next couple of weeks as we're sort of gearing into, unfortunately, a fire season that could be well, more interesting than we'd like. Let's put it that way. All right, Climate Central we go. I want to introduce to you two fellas at Climate Central who, one has been on the show before, Shel Winkley. Shel, how you doing?
Always good. This is one of my favorite things to do, Royal. It's always good to chat with you.
We have a good time. And Tom D. Liberto, how are you, Tom?
Hey, great to be here. Shel talks so highly. I'm really excited to join you today.
Well, you know, Shel. So we're going to talk about, Shel. We're going to talk about El Nino. And I want to start from this place of, first of all, Shel, I ask you guys this every time when I have one of you on. Tell us about Climate Central. I think people need to know what you do, what you're all about, and why you're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that really it's just made up of a bunch of weather nerds, a lot of data, a lot of scientists and communicators. We can do all of the data. We create science that we've talked about here before, attribution science, so we can quantify what you're feeling out the door. So Royal, you were talking about the heat that you're experiencing today. Using attribution science, we know that it's made at least 2 times more likely because of climate change. So we know there's a climate fingerprint to the heat that you're feeling in Phoenix today. But really what we want to do with all of this data and this science is we want to tell the stories around it. Why does it matter to Arizona? Why does it matter to Phoenix? Why does it matter to the United States? So we use these tools in order to tell the stories of climate change and help us prepare for it, help us hopefully try to bring down some of this global warmth that we're experiencing, but also just to inform our communities about the changes that we're experiencing.
And Tom, let me ask you, as researchers and communicators, do you feel sometimes there's pushback when you are talking about climate change and a warmer world? Do you run into that on, your professional or personal basis?
Well, I'm a weather nerd to begin with, and one thing you learn early on when you're dealing with the weather is that you're going to get pushback no matter what you say. So whether it's making a forecast for the weather that you might get wrong because Mother Nature is difficult to understand sometimes, or whether you're talking about climate change and these sorts of things. But the way I always think about it is the reason why I really got into this is I just want to make sure people know what's coming and so they can prepare, whether that's the weather forecast or whether we're talking about climate change.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I am showing now a very rudimentary graphic of El Nino as it could occur in the winter, in which would show wetter conditions to the south, warmer conditions to the north, and perhaps some drier conditions. Okay, so first of all, you guys, tell me how crude that is. Is it any good, that map?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's kind of the standard of what to expect. You've got these different weather variabilities, but, You want to, I always say that El Nino gets all of the attention. Let's back up for a second and think about the La Nina winter that we just went through, which is one of the reasons, not the entire reason, but one of the reasons you had one of the warmest winters of record, one of the driest winters of record, one of the biggest snow droughts we've experienced. That played part of it. So hopefully, as this El Nino turns on, and we can talk about the strength of it, but you're mentioning the fire danger that's around today and seemingly will continue. Hopefully, El Nino can help a little bit with that. It's probably going to be well after, towards the end of summer and into the winter before we really get the effects of El Nino going. So I don't know that it's going to help a lot in the near term, but hopefully maybe towards the end of fire season, there might be a bit of relief thanks to our friend El Nino.
Well, it's really interesting that our 30 and our 90-day outlooks, and not the 90-day that we like to use for the monsoon is July, August, and September. That's pretty much the months where it would rain the most, are showing, that green, that sort of positive indicator that there's more than a 50-50 chance of getting more rain than average across Arizona. Is that a factor of this transitioning from, La Nina to Enso neutral to El Nino? Is that a function of that?
It's a piece of it. The other piece of that too, though, is we've discussed this a little bit together, is warmer oceans, right? We've got warmer oceans that allow for more evaporation, which means that more of that rain-making moisture is going into the atmosphere to feed the monsoonal flow. And we've got a greedier, thirstier atmosphere that is helping to cause the drought right now that we're experiencing, but also it can hold more moisture. So if we can really unlock it, we have the chance to get some beneficial rain, but we also know that a thirstier atmosphere means the potential for heavier rain, which could lead to more flash flooding. So it's one of those double-edged swords, right? Like it hopefully can be a good thing, but we've also got to watch out for too much of a good thing all at once.
Yeah, and Tom, I was reading just last night, not only are they doing sea surface temperatures on this darn El Nino, but they now see warming beneath the surface that is going to upwell and potentially make El Nino stronger. Tell me a little bit about that and the technology it takes to get underwater temperature information.
Yeah, so if you're looking at what top down, it looks kind of like, it's going to get warmer quick. But then if the big story is underneath, there's this huge area of warmer than average water that's slowly making its way at depth from the western Pacific Ocean to the eastern Pacific Ocean. This is a classic sign of a developing El Nino. Now, how the heck do we measure what's going on underneath the Pacific Ocean, frankly, in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean? And it's a really interesting story. Back in the early 1980s, we had what maybe folks would call a super El Nino back in 1982-83, a strong El Nino that kind of was missed by the world's meteorologists and climate scientists. And it was because we didn't have measurements in the Pacific Ocean. So after that, the global community got together and was like, I think we should put measurements out there. And there are these, what's called the Tau buoys. And there are these buoys that kind of go north to south in certain longitudes across the Pacific Ocean, which measure not only how warm the water is at the surface, but also going down 300 feet to be able to give us that really, really vital information that otherwise we wouldn't have. And we wouldn't be able to tell you that we see this kind of huge area of warmer than average water moving its way to the east and potentially showing developing El Nino. So
it's a little bit counterintuitive in the sense that we know that heat rises and hot water rises. So how does this area of warmer water get underneath the ocean and start moving to the east like you're describing? I mean, is there some sort of force that does that? Yeah, so there are these winds called the trade winds in the tropics that constantly blow from like the east to the west. So if you were standing on water, the western Pacific Ocean is actually higher than the eastern Pacific Ocean. Oh, man. It's a weird thing to think about. And then sometimes what happens is that as the water moves to the west, it gets warmer and the pool of warm water expands pretty deep in the western Pacific Ocean. And then occasionally those trade winds slow down. And if you're pushing something really, really hard and then you slow down a little bit, all that stuff starts to come back at you. And that's what's basically happening across the Pacific Ocean. You have all of that warmer water, not only at the surface, but like throughout the entire water column, now moving its way to the east.
and slowly sloshing its way back. And that is El Nino. Once that warm water gets to the surface, it can affect where thunderstorms form across the Pacific Ocean, and that is that tide to the atmosphere that leads to there being all sorts of craziness that goes on across the world.
Yeah, and Shel, is that why you, I say you, but is that why climatologists and meteorologists in general seem to be, I don't want to say stoked, but they think they've got the forecast on this one nailed down pretty good?
Yeah, what's funny is that when you reached out to talk about El Nino, I really wanted Tom to be part of this conversation because I like to call him a bit of a El Nino curmudgeon, if you will. You've seen, he is, and he'll admit it. But you've seen these big forecasts. We've got the modeling that's there, but, and I'll let Tom speak a little bit more to this, but it depends on your time scale. It depends on the model that you're using. Yes, everything does show signs to this very high-end super El Nino, Godzilla El Nino.
Oh.
But we still don't know quite yet. And I'll let Tom pick it up from here on that part.
Yeah, Tom, tell us about that.
Yeah, I'll go yell at a cloud for a little bit as my El Nino curmudgeon. Yeah, so we have seen examples in the past where conditions looked also incredibly good, like there's going to be a strong El Nino form, and then nothing happens. We don't have to go back very far. This happened in 2014. We saw this huge area of warmer than average water moving its way eastwards across the tropical Pacific, and then June happened, and it kind of went, nothing happened.
Yeah.
And then the year after, we saw the exact same thing, and we had one of the strongest El Ninos we've seen since 1950. So one thing I've learned is that Mother Nature holds all the cards, and there is still plenty of time for either this El Nino to kind of reach that potential, or for this El Nino to not even form. And what we'll really learn a lot more is probably when we get into June a little bit, because the truth of the matter is, if we look at the models, the weather models, the climate models that we use to predict these things, they stink predicting El Nino in the springtime. They're bad.
I've heard
They're
that.
really
Yeah,
bad
I've
at
heard
it.
that, yeah.
They're really, really bad. So the skill doesn't really get better until June. So if you start to see these things continue, these forecasts continue as we get into the summer months, then you'll start seeing me become less of a curmudgeon. I'll believe it a bit more. But until then, I'm always very cautious because I know that we can have something range from nothing to a big thing.
Oh man, that's crazy. Okay, Shel and Tom, we're going to take a break, and coming up, we're going to put you on the spot, each of you, what you're going to call the El Nino, what adjective you're going to put before the El Nino, and also we'll talk more about the signs too when we return. Welcome back to Sonoran Sky Live. We're talking with Shel Winkley and Tom Liberto from Climate Central. We're talking about El Nino, and is it going to be a super duper one or whatever's happening? We do know something is changing. Guys, I put up a map that I just took right off of ENSO site earlier today, and it shows the probability for El Nino coming in over the next several months, and as you say, probably later in the year and through the winter time. But I also I'm using the one where it breaks up into like 4 segments, whether it's going to be way higher than average, average, or lower than average. And is that kind of Tom what you're thinking about when you're talking about what we're going to see for El Nino? We don't know what form we're going to see at this point.
Yeah, we're talking about this and adding all these sorts of crazy adjectives about it. But right now, that when people refer to, I would say, a super blah, blah, blah El Nino, they're really referring to that really, really dark red, which is about a 1 in 4 chance of this event happening, which is really high for something of that magnitude. But also, statistically speaking, it's not the most likely outcome.
Right, because there's a 3 in 4 chance, roughly speaking, that it doesn't occur, even if El Nino does occur, correct?
Correct.
So I am reading that. Shel I always ask Shel, am I reading that correctly? And Shel usually says, no, you're not, Royal. Let me tell you how to read that. So as we're looking at that graphic and talking about El Nino, here's the question I want to ask either one of you guys. So this strong El Nino may occur. Let's say may occur, 25% that it's going to occur, but it's going to occur into a different, hotter world than we've seen these occurring before. Isn't that kind of a factor in what kind of outcomes we're going to see?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a shot at this first. And, the last El Nino we experienced was 2004, 2005, right? So, and that's the one that when you look at the global temperature, we've talked about this a bit before, like that added heat is on top. I'd like to think of it as like a cake. So climate change is your moist, squishy layer of the cake, but El Nino is maybe the frosting on top. So that adds to this warmth that is the base layer of the cake, and then this extra global warmth that we get from these El Nino events. But what we know, 2024 was not only the United States' warmest year of record, but it was also the hottest year recorded globally. So will that happen with this El Nino? We have to wait and see. We have to understand the strength, but we know that there's already this warmth that is baked in because of us as humans emitting heat trapping pollution into the atmosphere, that now all of this is extra. And if you go back to some of the extreme weather that we experienced in 2024, some of the extreme weather that we experienced in 2025, not to say that all of that is directly tied to El Nino specific, but we can understand how this push of global temperatures and that little extra added heat, how the Earth reacts to it and the weather that we experience because of that added heat here on Earth.
Yeah, and back in the late 90s here, 97, 98, we had an El Nino. There was an El Nino, I should say, that impacted Arizona a lot. We had a ton of rain and then followed up with a ton of snow. But I was thinking about that, and before the turn of the century, we had a much different atmosphere to work with than we do now. And so, Tom, does that change things?
Yeah, when 1997, 98, when that El Nino happened, the global temperatures in 1998 absolutely blew the doors off of the previous record. It was an unbelievable year. That year would be cold now if we had something like that happen. To now to the point where, now it's normal that when you have an El Nino, it tends to lead to there being a little bit of an extra oomph on global temperatures, but because of that warming trend, we know that the atmosphere that these El Ninos are occurring in is very different than the atmosphere that previous El Ninos were occurring in. And what does that mean? Well, as Shel mentioned, we know that a warmer atmosphere is a thirstier atmosphere. So what ends up happening with El Ninos is that you can take their impacts, no matter what location you're in, and basically amplify them. So, in Arizona, you tend to see there be an increase in precipitation in the wintertime. Well, a warmer atmosphere usually means that you can see even more precipitation fall. And the reverse can happen. So if you're in an area where you tend to see drier than average conditions during El Nino, because of this warming trend due to climate change, it usually means that things are a little bit even more drier than normal. So what climate change is doing is taking these normal impacts from El Nino and basically turning them up to 11 or amplifying them. Otherwise, compared to what we would have seen previously. So we don't necessarily need, for instance, as strong of an El Nino back in 1997, 1998 to reach the same level of global temperatures. We could reach that even with a La Nina or neither El Nino La Nina in a given year. So it just is amazing. It's a completely different atmosphere that we're having these events occur in.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, and
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would add, with climate change, we think about the winter. You expect snow to fall in mountainous areas of the West, and that didn't really quite happen. And again, a piece of that was La Nina. But essentially, we know that climate change has changed our weather so that it's not the weather that we experienced a couple decades ago, that our parents and our grandparents experienced. So even with this El Nino turning on and the things that we come to expect because it is an El Nino pattern, climate change kind of flips that script, and it makes it maybe not as quite as reliable as some of those patterns that we saw in a world that wasn't as warm as we are today. And the last piece I'll go with that 97, 98 El Nino is that in 1997, if you look at least nationally, I was just looking up the numbers from NOAA, 97 is pretty far down the list in terms of where we landed for temperatures for the year across the United States. But 1998 is number 11. So when we go through 2026, as this El Nino is building, again, I think we're going to see more of the effects of what this El Nino can bring, at least temperature-wise, when we get into 2027 versus maybe what we see at the end of 2026. And the last piece of that is, looking at projections right now, without the El Nino fully developed, it's already projected that 2026 is probably going to land maybe around number 4 in terms of global warmth. So that's without the added heat that we're experiencing from El Nino.
That's crazy. All right, guys, coming up after this last break, I am going to ask you both the rookie question that I have for you. It's kind of a rookie question, so be prepared. We'll be back in a couple of minutes on Sonora and Sky Live. Welcome back to Sonora and Sky Live. We're talking with Shel, Winkley, and Tom Liberto from Climate Central, all about El Nino. Okay, rookie question time. So there's this area of very warm water off the coast of Southern California known as the blob. Will the blob, rookie question, have any impact on what we'll see with El Nino over the next 6 months to 12 months? Either one of you can take that.
I would say that the blob itself isn't going to like impact the way El Nino eventually develops. Like El Nino's going to develop whether it wants to develop or not because of the blob existing further to the north. Now the blob will have an impact on weather, especially regional weather around that area, since it's such a huge area of warmer than average water. But it's not necessarily going to say, hey, El Nino, stop doing what you're doing, or do it even faster. It's just kind of like a plus in addition to what's going on in the Pacific.
Yeah, and could that mean like more rain or more snow to some areas there? I mean, could it mean that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's when we talk about the rains that happen in the summertime. You have this huge area of warmer than average water that could easily be transported up into the atmosphere and across the southwestern United States. So I think it's one reason why when we take a look at these monthly and seasonal outlooks that there's a little bit of green there, that they're expecting it to be maybe a slightly wetter than average summer.
All right, Shel. You sent us Shel, sorry to interrupt, but you sent us a graphic. I want to make sure I get it on. And it's about the heat that we've been having here in Arizona since March. 9 days of 100 degrees or more in March. Are you kidding me? That just doesn't happen. And also recently, we've been hotter than normal the last 4 days. You sent this climate shift index. What does this tell us about what's happening in Arizona?
Yeah, so this is that attribution science that we started this conversation with. So this is our way to quantify, is climate change playing a role? When you walk outside today and you think, it's May 12th, like what's happening? Why are we hitting 100 degrees and why are we doing it so consistently? This is that tool that helps us. So this isn't saying that climate change necessarily absolutely caused this heat, but we do know that it is now more likely for you to have heat in the triple digits like you're experiencing today due to climate change. And when we look at this, this graphic is showing you is an average between your overnight lows and your daytime highs. So what you woke up to yesterday morning and where you ended the day yesterday. It's that average, and that's a climate shift index of 5, that deep maroon or red, whatever you want to call it. When you get a climate shift index of 5, Royal, that essentially means that the heat that you're experiencing yesterday and then again today would be almost impossible if it wasn't for climate change. So it doesn't mean that today wouldn't have been hot. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't have been maybe a little bit above what you would expect in early to mid-May, but the extreme heat that you're experiencing today, this dangerous heat that you're experiencing early in the season, wouldn't likely have been possible if it wasn't for the heat trapping pollution that we as humans have put into the atmosphere.
So we've added to that, certainly. That's just for sure. All right, well, under a conversation talking about El Nino. Tom, you're going to be first. You don't have to give an adjective before El Nino, but what do you think is going to occur as this El Nino builds in? I mean, are you with most of the experts that we're going to get one? And if so, how strong?
Yeah, I'm expecting overwhelmingly, over 90%, I would say, chance that we'll see an El Nino form by the end of the summer. Probably earlier than that, even towards the beginning of the summertime, that we'll start to see this El Nino form. It won't reach its kind of peak strength until sometime late fall or early winter. And right now, looking at everything, I would say it's at least, let's say, a moderate to strong El Nino, with the potential for it to be one of the stronger ones. We don't normally see conditions like this in previous El Ninos. So we are in rarefied air. We just know that it might not actually reach those lengths. But I think we can safely say I would expect an El Nino this year. I'd be preparing for an El Nino this year, potentially one that's pretty strong.
And Shel, following up on that, as we get into the winter, as you know, we had just a terrible snow drought in the west in most locations, including Arizona and up in Colorado. Could this impact that? Could we get more snow out of this?
Yeah, that's one of those things that we have to watch and kind of see how the weather patterns come together. But there could be this big whiplash. We went from this historically absolutely terrible winter. Maybe if El Nino can feed some of the moisture as we expect it to be, that could make it a blockbuster for portions of those mountain range. So, tale to be told, but yeah, it is possible that we could see this very big difference between what we experienced in 2025 and what we experienced in 2026.
It sure would be nice to get some snowpack in here, that's for sure. Shel Winkley and Tom Liberto, I appreciate you guys joining us from Climate Central. You can check out Climate Central's stuff. Just go to our website, Climate Central. And I mean, you guys have a ton of stuff there for a ton of different cities, and it's a really good place to get information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's everything that you want to drill down to the city of Phoenix. Maybe you got family elsewhere. We've got over 240 to 245 cities that you can look up the data for.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us today. Super El Nino or not, we got it done. We got this all covered for you, and we appreciate you watching us on Sonoran Sky Live. See you.